Welcome to Educational Alpha. I'm Bill Kelly, CEO of CAIA Association, and your host, bringing you on-the-ground conversations with business leaders, educators, and industry colleagues from around the globe. Educational Alpha is sponsored by iCapital, the financial technology company with the mission to power the world's alternative investment marketplace. Part innovator, part educator, and part navigator of the alternatives industry, iCapital offers intuitive, scalable digital solutions that have transformed how private market and hedge fund investments are bought and sold. With iCapital, financial advisors, wealth managers, and asset managers around the world now have access to everything they need to deliver the return and diversification potential of alternatives to high net worth investors. To learn more, visit iCapital.com.
In this episode, Bill speaks with Kostiantyn Shost, a CAIA member from Ukraine, who shares his unique perspective on professionalism and resilience amidst the country's ongoing conflict. Born into a military family with a globally diverse upbringing, Kostiantyn details his journey from various global posts to settling in Ukraine. Despite the severe backdrop of war, he maintains a commitment to professionalism and community service through his active participation in the CFA Society of Ukraine. Listen in.
Kostiantyn Shost, welcome to Educational Alpha.
Glad to be here.
I'm really looking forward to this discussion. We met maybe under less than perfect conditions. When we had the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, I reached out to our members in Ukraine, and there weren't many, so you were just one of a handful, and you and I developed a little bit of a virtual friendship through that first time we're actually seeing each other on camera and actually conversing live. But it's a very interesting story to tell and to hear, and I'm looking forward to the discovery there. But you're also a CAIA member, you're also a CFA member, you've been very active in the CFA Society of Ukraine, so despite what's gone on in your part of the world, professionalism is part of what defines you. So I think that that's going to be a very interesting part of the discussion too. But before we get into any of that, it would be maybe interesting for the audience and for me to hear a little bit about your background, because it is globally diverse, just like a portfolio to some degree. So maybe a little bit of where you're from, where you stopped in your journeys, and then how you ended up coming to Ukraine, where you're currently raising your family despite some of the challenges there.
I'd like to extend my gratitude for you reaching out at the lowest point, maybe, and to be able to be in touch with you and to listen to your warm reassurances was one of the things that kept my humanity alive, I guess. So thank you for that. And coming to your question, my father was a military man. He's on pension right now, but he was stationed. My relatives on the mother and father side are from Ukraine, but at the time of my birth, he was stationed on the outer east point of Soviet Union. So it's Sakhalin. It's something like 200 kilometers from the Japanese island of Hokkaido. And I spent my first years on Sakhalin, and then next 5 in East Germany. And then the Soviet Union started to collapse, and the Berlin Wall was demolished, and we get back to our homeland. My father was stationed in Zaporizhia, which is a place 40 kilometers from the largest nuclear plant in Europe, in Energodar, which is currently occupied by Russian forces. So I finished the school there, and then I graduated from Kyiv University, and then I worked throughout the post-Soviet space, I guess. So I spent some of my time in Moscow, up to 4 years, I guess, in total. I also worked in Donbass, which was the contentious region and one of the sort of breakaway regions that Russia occupied, annexed in 2022. And obviously I spent some time in Kyiv, also worked a little bit in Eastern Europe, and traveled on business extensively to US, to UK, a little bit to Africa. So I was working with the largest industrial groups in Ukraine, and for some time some switched the career. So I'm running my own consultancy, and I'm also founder and co-founder of 3 startups in health tech, insurance, and media. And also try to chip in to help out in the NGO space in Ukraine. So currently a returning member of the board to the CFA Ukraine Society. I had a spell there 10 years ago and decided to return because I think at this point we need to help out to the fullest extent. So this is pretty much it, I guess.
And are you a lawyer by early training too?
I got the basic economic education, so mainly in economic theory, and then I just out of school started to pursue professional certifications.
So on the professional certification, I don't know which came first, CAIA or CFA, but if I focus on CAIA first, I don't think we ever had a testing center in Kyiv or anywhere else in Ukraine. Where did you take the CAIA exam?
Actually, this was one of the issues why it took that long to take the CAIA certifications and to pass the exams. Because for CFA, it was pretty much straightforward. And I just got in one sitting over 2 years after they graduated from the university. And then for CAIA, I was just registering and not appearing for the test exams because they were all like outside of Ukraine and had to travel to them. And I also had some professional personal plans interfering with that commitment. But finally, I passed just on the eve of Russian invasion, 2021 in autumn. And then you had the CAIA exam test place in Kyiv. So basically, it was easy. Just a brief and curt broke from the office. So.
Good. Well, I'm glad you were able to persevere. And then the CFA, did you take all 3 levels in Kyiv or somewhere in Ukraine, or was that other stops in the journey?
Actually, I took one of 2 levels in Moscow because I was working there at the time. And the first one, and they were not offering anything past the first level in Kyiv, I guess. That was like old history 20 years ago.
Yeah. And one of the hallmarks of any credential is certainly getting through it is a bit of an undertaking, and credit to you for making this part of what's defined you. But then what it means once you get through it, and the concept of ongoing and continuous learning and networking and learning from the local community and learning from the global community. You've been active in the CFA Society of Ukraine, and I'm sure that in terms of events and gatherings, it's probably very different today than it was 2.5 years ago, prior to Feb of 2022. How big is the CFA Society of Ukraine, and are they doing much? And the answer is probably no, for obvious reasons, but what does the professional makeup consist of in Kyiv today?
I'd like to contradict you, actually, because the CFA Society is quite active right now.
Excellent.
I think that they've been a short hiatus, maybe in spring of 2022, but starting from autumn, from the business season, they came back at pretty much full swing and focusing a lot of events on the current challenges of being under the constant bombardments and near the active war zone, and also focusing on the recovery and what can be done to facilitate it in the best way. So what we could add along with the business community to that. So CFA Society is about 220 members year from year. And actually being a part of the CFA Society or CAIA Society, it gives you sort of a lot of networking opportunities outside of Ukraine. And you could build some personal business contacts out of there as well. Because if you travel somewhere, you could reach out and meet some of the members just for a cup of coffee or for a pint of beer and just have a conversation about what's happening in respective countries. And just share the experience and try to synthesize that into something which will be helpful for you in your personal pursuits and professional career. Again, I would like to extend a gratitude to the global CFA and CAIA community. They've been very helpful, and obviously like CAIA is a little bit smaller, on the smaller side in Ukraine, but they've been helpful too. But for the CFA Society, they've been sort of running some job boards for the members who traveled to Europe, like before the war, like more from the onset of the war, and women and children were almost required to cross the border and to find refuge, at least until the situation was really shaky and it wasn't safe to stay in Kyiv because it was that close. 50 meters from my house, one of the missiles landed and burned down the buildings. I don't really think that anyone wanted to be in the kind of conditions. So at least we had to evacuate the families. So
it's hard to judge just looking on a camera, but things look very calm, safe, and peaceful as I'm looking at you on camera now. But I know that maybe belies the reality just behind the wall there. But I know you and I had spoken very early on, and I know your wife and children had left Ukraine, but they're now back with you and everybody's safe?
Right. So, we are as human beings, we're able to survive the harsh conditions of the ice age. So basically, I think that kind of adaptability to the current environment is kind of ingrained in our mentality and physics. So you have to adapt, and certain aspects of the life would never be the same again because I lost some friends and some relatives to this war.
And just in terms of day-to-day life, kids back in school and going to the local market to get bread and milk and things like that, is it maybe different, but is it kind of life as a new normal, if I can even put it that way?
We always have on the background this kind of anxiety and understanding that you're living through the war. And they've been I think it was last year, we had 20 consecutive night attacks on Kyiv, or something like 20. So the sounds of drones and anti-missile forces working against those drones and the ballistic missiles. This is not like the night you would envision. We should be conducive to the rest and everything, but I'm not complaining. We are not complaining because we are not on the battlefront, and there are our compatriots who are battling for Ukraine right now and living on the battlefield. So I think that we have our obligation to keep the country running, to help out, and 90% of all Ukrainians have been involved in some kind of voluntary activities related to the help to the military personnel and frontline. So we have to help out to the most extent we have, to the largest extent. And when it comes to the day-to-day life, it's pretty much calm. So, and sometimes I feel like I'm in the middle of the movie. If you remember this scene in the Band of Brothers, then they came to this Austrian mountain lake and had a swim. And it's so serene and so beautiful around and with the greenery and something. So the sprint is in full swing, but still we have this apprehension and we have constant attacks and the supersonic missiles. They just give you a warning 30 seconds. So, and one of them was sent to the center of the Kyiv in the middle of the working day about a month ago.
Well, I admire your courage and resolve. And I think, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I guess you get hardened to these realities. And maybe what was troubling yesterday becomes part of the normal for today, no matter what that is. And I guess life does have to go on. So I wish you and your family continued peace as much as that can be part of the equation. And I just hope that we get to a better place. So maybe just turning the page from there for a moment and maybe back to the personal side. And I know that's an abrupt transition, but you'll have to bear with me. But I want to come back to something you mentioned earlier, Kostiantyn, about these 3 startups and learn a little bit more about that and what the fundraising environment is like. And I think certainly here in North America, more specifically in the United States, we have a tendency to whine about the drying up of access to liquidity, and particularly on the startup venture side, where money was aplenty just a couple of cycles ago. It's now gotten very difficult, and you're probably living difficulty in spades in Ukraine. So maybe talk a little bit about what these 3 startups are about, and maybe they're funded off the Shost family balance sheet. I'm curious to know what the funding sources are there.
Right. So one of them is iPlina. It's a startup which is working with the AI-assisted back issues. So because we have identified a niche in the MSK space and throughout the world and mostly in the US. where the people tend to go through these painful, invasive procedures instead of trying to heal their pain and the back pain through the holistic exercise. So working with my friend out of Germany who has clinics there, and it was like international startup from the onset. So he started that based on the physical locations in Germany. And now the startup has a lot of success in Germany, but we are venturing to the US right now. We even find it like internally through the bootstrap, basically, and also took on some early angel funding for that, and pretty much looking to expand to the US right now.
Before we get to the other two, so is the angel funding coming from outside of Ukraine and places like Germany? And is that also a thought around an exit strategy too?
It goes like from its international company that takes the money from the respective locations, so it's not funded from Ukraine.
Okay, and then so tell me a little bit about the other two.
Yeah, and another one, it's OKIS insurance solution. It works around the fallacies in the risk assessment and risk management and response, which we have throughout all levels of society, globally and on local level. So we tend to over-rationalize the past and kind of run with the projections and the expectations, which seems to be mathematically sound and deterministic from the statistical perspective, but they lack an explanatory power. So, for example, when it comes to the auto insurance, the random event of accidents has turned into something like the forecasted event, which you could figure out based on some inherent social metrics of the driver, like age and the credit score and everything. So they can turn it into turn this approach on the head. So we are not offering the pricing to specified pricing to like customized pricing for based on your personal characteristics, because they have nothing to do with the random event. We just offering you the same price for the same car. So no matter which bracket you've been put to by the traditional insurance companies, so you get the same price for the same car. And only if you get in the accident and we're starting to look at you from the risk perspective. And if you're sort of at fault, then your risk profile starts to kick in. Because nowadays, the whole groups of people discriminate because it's almost prohibitive to take out insurance on if you're young adult or if you had prior accident, no matter the circumstances of that accident, you get the hike in insurance premiums. So we are working against that, against the grain, and trying to implement this in the US market.
Interesting. So if I understand the model correctly then, and having 5 kids and 4 of them boys, when they turn 16, I don't even want to begin to tell you what it did to my premiums.
I could only imagine.
Yeah, so under this model, if I'm a 30, 40, 50-year-old male versus a 19-year-old male and are priced more risky than women, maybe for the right reasons in the U.S. insurance industry, you would price them the same? You would equate them the same level of risk until there was an accident?
Not only will price them the same, we'll add them as additional drivers to your car for free.
Wow. So maybe offline you can send me a link and perhaps I can become a customer.
We're not operational yet in the US. Just we're testing out it in sort of our test market, and it turned out that it works pretty much well for both the metrics, financial metrics of the insurance carrier, and also it works well for the family as well.
Yeah, yeah. So are you using any form of generative AI to calculate risk, or is that not part of the model?
We actually break down so we have this sophisticated tree of deductibles, which kicks in once we are able to identify what are the circumstances of the accident. So not using any of AI tools, because again, we are treating it as a random event. And of course, there is some kind of reckless driving involved in a very limited number of cases, but 99, 98%. So basically, we feel like 70% of all the population. This is the people which we would like to welcome to and introduce to our products. So only like maybe 25 to 30%. This is the audience who would not like to have long-term basis, but we don't discriminate like by the formal criteria. And this is what is broken in the US system, because you just exclude the whole stratus.
Okay. And the funding and then the potential exit for this model, is that also outside of Ukraine? Is that Germany based too?
Yes, it is, because again, the economic activity in Ukraine is ongoing. There are some of the investments which are been made into the country. But of course, like if you open the risk maps for any insurance brokers or reinsurance companies, you'll see it's an active war zone. And I think our community on the side of the insurance brokers was working with the providers of this information to differentiate between various regions of Ukraine, because Ukraine is Amsterdam to Rome and Paris to Warsaw dimensions. So it's something like you can have the granular approach to, and you must have granular approach to. But of course, the investment activity is subdued as significant efforts are being devoted to fighting the Russian aggression. And of course, the refugees which left the country in droves, like 6 million or something, they are not in Ukraine, they are not consuming in Ukraine. So basically, this is also one of the reasons behind the reduced economic activity.
And then there's a third business tucked in here too. Is there a trifecta?
So basically, we're working with the production houses to generate the TV formats, unscripted mainly, for the shows which we're then going to distribute either online or through the established media TV channels, OTC or whatever. So this is to support and to rely upon the creative community of Ukraine, because we're pretty much famous for that around the world. So a lot of clips have been shot in Ukraine before the war erupted, and like clips by the major A-level stars. And I think that creative industries have the significant potential in Ukraine, which is being utilized during the war, but of course we expect it to get boost and momentum from after the victory.
Okay, well, good luck with all three of those. So sticking with maybe the broader economy beyond your businesses, and the two of them are probably highly correlated to some degree, even though there's a bit of a German overlay. But one of the things I think, certainly from the U.S. perspective, that surprised many people, and we found out about this when Russia invaded Ukraine, is how dependent the world, and certainly the EU, was on commodities being produced and coming out of Ukraine. And some of those supply chains had been periodically, maybe on purpose, been choked off. But I think some of them have opened back up again. So how is commerce and the general economy, maybe in spite of, or maybe in the realities of the war that continues to rage on 2 years in?
When it comes to natural resources, Ukraine is one of the top 5 destination for the combined natural resources potential. It has not been realized in full because of the lack of proactivity maybe on the Ukrainian government, because they very reluctant to introduce foreign capital into that sensitive area, because natural resources is not only about the economy, it's also about national security. And there is still some limitations in place that preclude you to share the certain information on certain minerals with the foreign citizens. And you might appreciate the confusion it brings to the whole investment thesis and stuff, because you could only talk about it in the abstract terms and not able to identify the particular deposit, something like that. So before the war, I've been involved in a couple of critical minerals projects, because, European Union, following the US, they started to build up the direct relationship with the vicinity, relationship with the countries in the vicinity, because of so many critical materials coming through the China, not necessarily from the China, but they coming through as a part of the logistical and production cycle. So critical minerals were like one of the hot topics in Ukraine before the war. And Ukraine is pretty much well known for the agriculture products throughout the world, I guess. And the Russians blockaded the Black Sea. We had that ruptures and global logistics, and basically some of the contracts were not acted upon, and that led to significant disruption on the global market. But nowadays, with the heroic efforts of Ukrainian military, the Black Sea routes are open for business, and more ships are coming to and from the Black Sea ports of Ukraine. But I think that from the natural resources perspective, Ukraine would be one of the hottest destinations post-war. And this is where one of the investment teams lies, and we have preliminary interest from the largest companies in the world, like looking at this, but not really committing at this point. So, because of the risks involved right now.
Well, as I may have mentioned at the top of this discussion, Kostiantyn, that we added geopolitical risk to the CAIA curriculum. And I think you can read that in the pages, but I think the listeners now are going to feel it through their ears from your mouth. And I think that brings the reasons why this is an important human consideration as well as an investment consideration. So I appreciate those real life lessons from you today. Have you been able to travel outside of Ukraine yourself? I know your wife and kids left periodically or maybe early on and are now back. Have you been outside of Ukraine yourself?
No, because it has several limitations on the military age males.
Okay. Are you serving at all? Have you had to serve?
Not yet.
Oh, yet is an operative word. So, well, I appreciate you taking the time. I know that life is anything but normal for you, even though maybe some of this is settled into maybe a routine that nobody wanted in the first place. But there is a movie that was of some maybe global renown with Tom Hanks called Forrest Gump. And there was a famous line in there by his mother saying, life is like a box of chocolates. And I oftentimes think about that line vis-a-vis our CAIA members. And when I pick one up, you never know what you're going to get inside. And this was a very different path of discovery. And we probably have a handful of members in Ukraine. I think you're the only one I've had the great pleasure to meet and chat with, and appreciate all that you do, all that you stand for. Despite what you've been through, professionalism still rings through when I talk to you, Kostiantyn, and the fact that you can continue to be an entrepreneur and persevering throughout all this is really quite remarkable. So thanks for taking the time that you spent with me today.
Thank you, Bill.
So wishing you all the best and stay safe, and all the best to your family too.
We'll try to. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Educational Alpha. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. Learn more about the CAIA Association and subscribe to the show at CAIA.org. That's CAIA.org. See you next time.